Everyone, welcome to day 23 of 30 days of real estate content. My name is John Olis and I'm the CEO of Red Diamond Properties Limited. Our services cut across property development to property brokerage to property management to short-let brokerage and the likes. And one of the things we also do is adding value to people by giving them so much knowledge that will help them in different aspects of the real estate space, which falls under property education. Over the last 22 days, I've shared so much with you that you need to know about real estate in Nigeria, Lagos, Abuja, generally in Nigeria. And one thing you need to know is that the real estate space, to a very great extent, has rules and regulations that guide its affairs. It has rules and regulations that guide its affairs. And one of the aspects of real estate is yearly residential rentals. And rental generally, I said in one of our Facebook live some days ago that yearly residential rental has about 80% of Nigerians utilizing it. So about 80% of Nigerians, according to the Vision report, live in yearly residential rentals. And the relationship created is what we call a landlord and tenant relationship. So what I want to do today is this. Lagos is the most populous state in Nigeria with a population of over 20 million, and it has a law that regulates the relationship between landlord and tenant, which is called the landlord and tenant, the Lagos State Landlord and Tenant Law of 2011. As we speak, there is a Lagos State Tenancy Bill of 2025, but it's still a bill. It has not been passed into law, right? It has not been passed into law. So it is still a bill, so I won't be speaking on that. So until the 2025 Lagos State Tenancy Bill has been passed into law, it is not yet valid. What still operates, regulating the relationship between landlords and tenants in Lagos is the Lagos State Tenancy Law of 2011. So today I just want to share some basic things that every landlord and tenant should know in Lagos. So one thing you need to know is that the law forbids both the landlords and tenants from paying rent in advance. So you are paying rent in advance 2, 3, 4, 5 years. The law forbids it. It is not allowed for you to pay rent in advance. Many people do that. Many landlords demand that, but it is forbidden under the law. And doing so, if you are caught, can lead to you being fined for 3 months or being sentenced to being fined 100,000, 100,000, or being sentenced to 3 months imprisonment. So you need to know that demanding as a landlord that tenant pay rent in advance, or you as a tenant complying with that pay rent in advance, it's a crime under the Lagos State Tenancy Law of 2011, and it can lead to a fine of 100,000 or an imprisonment for a term of up to 3 months. And now the next one I want to talk about is a duty that is imposed on landlords in Lagos as regard to when a tenant pays rent. The law mandates that you issue a receipt to the tenant, and it must state some things, 5 of them, and I'm going to state them. 1 is the date on which the payment was received. 2 is the name of both the landlord and the tenant. 3 is a description of the property. 4 is the rent of the amount paid, and 5 is the period for which the rent covers. So it's very important. The law states these 5 things that must be in a receipt of payment issued by the landlord to a tenant. Those 5 things are very necessary, so it's very important you know about them. Next, I want to talk about rights that tenants in Lagos enjoy, which they may not be aware of. Right, so you generally you have right to privacy. You need to know that even though a landlord is the owner of the property, but by renting it out to you, he has let go of some of his rights So your landlord cannot just come and invade your privacy in your apartment saying he's your landlord. No. You have a right to your privacy as a tenant. You also have a right to freedom from unnecessary disturbance. The landlord cannot just come and be disturbing you. The caretaker cannot just come and be disturbing you, knocking on your door, saying, okay, because I'm the landlord, I can do what I want. It's still my house. No. The law prohibits that. The law prohibits that. You also enjoy the right to exclusive possession of your property, of your apartment, exclusive possession, to the exception or exemption of others. These are some rights you enjoy as a tenant in Lagos. But the only exception is where the landlord wants to inspect your property. And they cannot just come and barge into your property and inspect it. They must have given you prior notice that they are coming to inspect. Generally, the notice may be stated in your tenancy agreement, but the length of notice, right? But it's very important that your landlord gives you notice. You cannot just barge into your apartment. Also, in some properties, there are the areas we call common areas. So it can be maybe a sitting place, maybe a place where you have the bin and a general waste can where you put your bin. You have a right to freely use such areas for reasonable and lawful purposes. So you need to know that. Another thing you need to know is that if you ask your landlord and he permits you and you improve the outlook of your apartment, you put seal, POP, you change the kitchen sink, maybe you change the toilet bath, you have a jacuzzi, and you've gotten the approval of your landlord before doing so, your landlord is under an obligation under the Lagos Tenancy Law of 2011 to compensate you financially for all these improvements you have done to your apartment when you are leaving the place, when you are packing out. So the law imposes that duty on your landlord. Yes, when you are moving out of the apartment, the law imposes a serious duty on your landlord to financially compensate you when you are leaving. So these are some rights you enjoy as a tenant, in Lagos State. But you know, it has been said where there's a right, there's usually an obligation, a corresponding obligation. So what are some of the obligations the law places on you as a tenant in Lagos State? You have the first obligation to pay rent as and when due. Not just rent, other existing charges, other rates, other charges that might be imposed by the law. You have a duty to pay that. You have a duty to pay that. Secondly, you also have a duty and obligation to keep your property in a good state. So because you own exclusive possession of the property does not make you the owner of the property. You just have exclusive possession of the property, but you are not the owner of the property. So you have a duty to keep your property, your apartment where you are staying in a good and tenantable state, fair and wear exempted. So you have a duty to keep it in a good state. Not just because it says it's your own property, you don't keep it in a good state. Tiles you met in a good state, if they get broken, the walls are not kept in a good state, kitchen sink spoiled and the likes. No. You have a duty to keep it in a good state. And it's because so many people do not keep their properties in good state, that's why many landlords now charge a caution deposit. They usually call it a refundable caution deposit, that if the property remains in a good state when you are leaving, they refund it to you. But if not, what do? They use such to repair it. Because we have instances when tenants come and they spoil an apartment. In fact, one of my mentors in real estate, he has some blocks of flats in Lekki Phase 1, Lagos State. And he talked about how the tenants there altered the outline of the property, bringing new things, building new partitions in the property without getting the landlord's approval. So that's an alteration of the outlook of the property, not keeping it in a good state. So that is very wrong. That is very wrong. I've said earlier that you have a right to exclusive possession, but you also have a duty to give your landlord at the same time access to your property when he wants to inspect it, when she wants to inspect it, right? They want to inspect it to see the state of the property. They want to inspect it in order to make necessary repairs. You have that duty to give them access to your property for necessary repairs. So that's an obligation the law of Lagos State tenancy places on you, landlord and tenant. So I go to the next one, which I already stated earlier. You cannot make alterations or additions to your property without seeking and getting the consent of the landlord. It's not just you informing the landlord that I want to make alterations to my property. No, you must inform the landlord and get their consent, because they give it to you in a certain state. But maybe you now want to do alteration, maybe in the parlor that you feel is big enough, you now want to carve out a space and maybe have a small room, or you want to carve out a space, maybe have a small study or dining table. You can't just do that. You can't alter the state of a property that you're residing in as a tenant without getting the consent of the landlord. So you need to know that. Another thing you need to know is that because you are a tenant, the law prohibits you from subleasing your tenancy, subleasing your apartment, your rental property to another person. So you got a yearly tenancy, and I'm bringing another person to stay there for 3 months. That is subletting your property, and the law prohibits that, except the landlord is aware of this and it gives you permission, not oral permission. It gives it to you in a written document to do so. So that is it. You must know that. Now, I said you do not have you cannot on your own alter a property, the outline and all that without the consent of the landlord. But if peradventure you have done that, you've done substantial or structural damages on your apartment, you have a duty to notify your landlord about it. That law places a duty on you, but you also need to know that because you've done such alterations without the consent of the landlord, you may not get a compensation if you are leaving. So that is it. All right, I've stated the obligations of the tenant. Let me now state some of the obligations of a landlord. So the first obligation that the Lagos tenancy law places on you is that you have a duty to refrain from infringing on the rights of your tenant to enjoy quiet and peaceful enjoyment of that property that they rented from you. So the law prohibits you from disturbing your tenant because you are the owner of the property. So the law prohibits you for doing that. Your tenant has the right to quiet and peaceful enjoyment of their property. The law also imposes some rates and charges and duties that you are to be and not your tenant. So for instance, rates and charges like ground rent. A ground rent is a financial obligation on a landlord that the law imposes on the owner of the property. Ideally, it's not the tenant that is to pay ground rent. It is you, the landlord, that should pay ground rent, except your tenancy agreement states otherwise. But you are the owner of the property. You should pay ground rent. But if it's local government taxes and rates generally, the tenant should be the one that should do that. But you have to pay ground rent. The law also places a duty on you as a landlord to insure your property from any loss or damage. So whether it's water insurance, fire insurance, you have a duty to insure your property against any loss or damage. It's very important. That's an obligation on you as a landlord. The other obligations on you, the law forbids you as a landlord from self-help, that is going to seize the property of your tenant or interfering with their access to their property. And it's very common. Many landlords do it. They are tired of a tenant. Instead of them to go through the legal route of going through the court, issuing notices, first the quit notice, then notice of intention to recover possession, then instituting action to report in court. Many landlords take the law into their hand. Sometimes they will seize the property of the tenant. Sometimes they will close the apartment externally with a different key. Some even go as far as removing removing the roof, or getting miscreants to throw out the property of the law or of the tenant. The law prohibits that. You are not permitted to seize your tenant's property, to confiscate their property, to interfere with their access to the property. You don't want them to enter because they have not paid rent. No, the law frowns against self-help, and there are consequences from doing that. You also are prohibited from refraining or restricting your tenant from enjoying the general common areas in your properties. That's an obligation the law places on you. And also the law imposes a demand on you to make repairs and maintain the external and common places in your property. So for instance, internal places in your property, generally repainting, it generally will be the duty of a tenant. Some small and minor repairs within the rental property is the duty of the tenant. But things like soak away breaking, like maybe fence breaking, or those general external repairs within the premises, the law imposes the duty on you as the tenant to do it. And the last obligation I want to talk about in relation to a landlord is in relation to service charge and security deposits. So know that you have a duty to give your tenant a separate receipt from house rent. Remember I said you have to give your tenant a house rent receipt, and I stated the 5 things that must be listed in that receipt. But if you are now asking for a security deposit or service charge, you have to give a separate receipt, and you give that separate receipt in these instances. One is where this is an obligation on you, is where you require your tenants to pay a security deposit to cover any damage or repairs to the property. You issue a separate receipt. 2 is where you as the landlord require the tenant to pay for certain services and facilities in the premises. So maybe you impose a security deposit or service charge on maybe light or water or cleaning of the common areas. Apart from the yearly tenancy receipt you have to give a separate one for that service charge, right? And yes, lastly, where you require the tenant to pay a service charge. And last but not the least, you might not know this, but the law also states that as a tenant, you can also request for your landlord to show you how the money is being disbursed. Your security deposit, your service charge. You have that right to make that demand on your landlord. So these are some of the things I wanted to know about the Lagos State Landlord and Tenancy Law. I'm not done yet. By God's grace, tomorrow I'm going to be sharing other things you need to know. Knowledge is power. The more you know your rights, the higher the likelihood that you will not be bullied as a tenant, or you will not be mistreated as a landlord. Knowledge is truly power. My name is John Olisa, and I'm the CEO of Red Diamond Properties Limited. We're a property development company. And we recently launched our first estate in Kuchiyako Extension, Kuchi, and you have the opportunity to build your dream house. It's as low as 1 million for a 200 square meter land. Actually 1.5 million for a 200 square meter land. You can build a 3-bedroom terrace duplex. With a 2.2 million, you can get a 300 square meter land where you can build a 4-bedroom semi-detached duplex. With a 400 square meter land, a 500 square meter land going for 3 million. 400 square meter land going for 3 million. You can build a 5-bedroom fully detached duplex. While with a 1,000 square meter land going for 7 million, you can build a block of flats, 6 units, consisting of 2 units each of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom flats. So you can reach out to me on +234 813 799 0792. I go again, +234 813 799 0792. or you can send an email to us at reddiamondproperties10@gmail.com. reddiamondproperties10@gmail.com. Thank you so very much for joining me in day 23 of 30 days of real estate content. And God's grace, tomorrow will continue. And for those of you who could not join us in our Facebook Live today, the video is going to be uploaded to my YouTube channel, John Olisa. And you can watch it, like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Thank you so very much for joining me. I meet you tomorrow. Have a good night. Bye.